So if everyone can sit down while our judges are deliberating, we have the privilege to listen to Dr. Coleen Lewis as our keynote speaker. She is a professor of computer science at Harvey Mudd. She specializes in computer science education, researching how people learn computer science and how people feel about learning computer science. Very relevant to many people in the audience today, including myself as a computer science educator. Her research seeks to identify effective teaching practices, a few of which I hope I followed, for creating equitable learning spaces where all students have the opportunity to learn. Lewis curates csteachingtips.org, which I just had the chance to check out the other day. I really recommend it. It has a bunch of tips for teachers in a very easy to consume format, and that's an NSF-sponsored project for disseminating effective computer science teaching practices. So without further ado, Dr. Coleen Lewis.
Okay, are you picking me up on the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for having me. This is super rad. I actually live just in Pasadena, and I work over at Harvey Mudd College. And Harvey Mudd is like 30 miles-ish away, just out the 210. Did people give me some nods or some shakes? Did people already know where that was? Yeah? Okay. So that's where, and I live over here. Actually, the little star just above the T in the Cal Institute of Technology logo. Okay, so I work at Harvey Mudd, and we're like super small. We've got 800 undergrads. That's it. We're with 4 other undergraduate institutions, so you can take classes across the bunch of them. But one of our claims to fame is that, like, do you know that not a lot of women study computer science at a lot of schools? Like, it's like just not a lot of them do. At Harvey Mudd, it's like not a thing of like, we have a bunch of women studying computer science. I identify as a woman. I'm a computer science professor. Half of our computer science professors are women, and then about half of our students identify as women. It's like, it's not magic. And I want to walk you through a few things that we do, and I want to tell you some stories about what I've done, particularly thinking about our students in the room, like, what does this path of computer science look like? I'll share a few of my stories. You heard a little bit about this in the introduction, but like this is what I'm about. I do education research, and I'm a computer science professor, and I'm all about making computer science accessible for all students. And I try and do this in my research and my teaching by trying to understand and optimize learning and understand and remove barriers. Okay, that's not totally relevant. Remember the stickers? Yeah? csteachingtips.org is my NSF project, and we have been interviewing a bunch of teachers to try and be like, yo, learning computer science can be like super hard, and teaching computer science and programming is like even harder, maybe. And so what are some ways we can help teachers be more effective? Okay, so we've got 3 tips from Harvey Mudd to make computer science more welcoming and accessible. And this first one is just, do you know that computer science is like a super broad field? Right? Like, you probably worked with people who do astronomy, but they also maybe do computer science. Do you know what I mean? And like, maybe their degree is in computer science, and maybe their degree is in astronomy, and maybe they work with people in different disciplines, and they're all just like, that science, that application of computer science is what they love. And so it has that breadth. So something that's happened at Harvey Mudd and at Berkeley and other places actually that have a lot of women studying computer science is we just show the breadth of computer science. Do you know you might hate some parts of computer science? That's chill. It's like super broad. Do you know what I mean? So like math, a lot of stuff, some people, they're like, oh, I'm a mathematician. And someone who does the exact same thing is like, I'm a computer scientist. Yeah? And then we have people over here who are like, hey, I'm a physicist. And another person who does the exact same thing, and they're like, nah, I'm a computer scientist. And so it has this whole breadth. And what's problematic at a lot of schools is they're like, oh, welcome to computer science. This is computer science. And it's like just one tiny little piece of it. And you might hate that tiny little piece of it, and that's chill, because computer science has that whole breadth. I didn't say, I told you we've got a bunch of women studying computer science. Was I like, oh, and then we made all the curriculum pink? Yeah? No, I didn't say that. It turns out computer science is a broad field, and students have a multiplicity of interests. Like, you might be interested in one thing that I'm like, meh, and that's cool. There's this problem where a lot of times we think about, like, oh, men do this and women do this, and we do that for a bunch of different categories. And we think of them as, like, totally separate. So I have a story for you, which is about, like, 15 or 20 years ago, there was a statistically significant difference between men and women's performance on the math SAT. And you're like, oh, that's not good. Have you heard this stereotype that, like, oh, women aren't good at math? Yeah? And it's like, oh, well, there's a statistically significant difference between men and women's performance on the math SAT. And you're like, okay, are you imagining that, like, every man did better than every woman on the math SAT? No, that's absurd, right? It turns out there are, like, some bell curves of how people performed. And, like, you know, maybe we have the averages for men and women's performance. And actually, someone's gender identity of any gender is probably actually a pretty poor predictor of how good they're going to do on the math SAT. Do you buy that? That, like, oh, we're not just two separate buckets. Okay, so we had this thing where, like, oh, the math SAT scores, men were doing better. Do you know how much better? On average, a quarter of a question better. Do you know how many questions are on that SAT? Like a bunch, and they were doing a quarter of a question better. But people who aren't thinking mathematically, right? Like, I heard a bunch of statistics in these presentations. People who aren't thinking mathematically, they're not thinking, oh, well, maybe the means or the averages are different, but, like, are they, and maybe they're statistically significantly different, like they're really different. But if the difference is meaningless, then maybe we don't care. Okay, so this is my, like, broader point of, like, this is not about turning things pink. This is about being like, oh, yo, turns out computer science is this super broad field. You might hate parts of it. That's chill. There's a bunch in here. And not all of our students are going to be interested in the same thing. That makes sense, because, like, they're people, and people are interested in different stuff. And so we try and think about much more broadly than even just, like, man, woman, being like, oh, we've got these students, and, like, first, maybe people call you students, but, like, first and foremost, I would call you a human. Yeah? And as humans, we've got, like, all these different parts of our identity, and those identities and those interests are going to bring you to computer science, and maybe one part is really going to strike you as the coolest. We're going to keep talking a little bit more about gender. Yeah? Okay, so my first tip is show the breadth of computer science. So I jump a little bit between, like, hey, students, what's what? And then, like, hey, instructors or people, right? Okay. My second one is challenge stereotypes. And already we've done that in thinking about this math data of someone being like, there's a statistically significant difference between such and such. Be like, oh, but how big is that difference? Does that difference matter? So we're already challenging stereotypes there. And I want to talk about a little bit of history first. Okay, this is a little hard to see, but red is the computer science. And red, this is the percentage of women in the field. And here we've got time, 1970 to 2010. And women in physical sciences, medical school, law school are trucking up, yeah? And then, like, around 1985, it sort of crashes. Oh, that is not great. So they're, like, we have this stereotype right now that, like, women don't do computer science, but, like, we don't think these days that, like, women aren't doctors, right? Raise your hand if you've had a woman doctor, right? Like, we don't think that, but we see this huge crash, and I think that these stereotypes are a piece of the puzzle, and we as humans, again, need to push back against those stereotypes. Okay, first of all, the graph, it doesn't start early enough, because actually the first six computer programmers, so 100% were women. Okay, so we started at 100%, then we dipped down some, and then we went up to about 35%, and then we're crashing, and we're now closer to like 15-ish%. Okay, this person wrote a book that's like, why did this crash happen? And he's like, oh, some nonsense. some nonsense went down where it's like, here they were like, personal computers. You should sit in your basement all by yourself and code and like, ba, 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 yeah? And so they were marketed to boys. Just like the way Fruit Loops are marketed to kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, no 75-year-old is like, oh, I saw this Fruit Loops commercial, and I thought, yeah, let me eat some Fruit Loops. Same kind of idea in terms of how computers were marketed. And Nathan Ensvenger talks about that in this rad book. Have people seen the HBO TV show, Silicon Valley? Yeah? This is kind of our stereotype about it, and it plays out in unpleasant ways. So from some of my research, a college student said this to me. They said, you know, to do computer science, you have to be able to make it their lifestyle. Can't just do it as a side thing. Have to be thinking about it all the time. Do you know that computer scientists are people? Do you know that not a single one of them is even capable of thinking about it all the time? Do you know that, like, we as computer scientists, we sleep and we eat and we have friends? We're humans that are interested in this broad field of computer science. So this is not the reality, but we have these ideas of a particular identity of who does computer science. Have people heard of the glass ceiling, where like women in leadership, they hit a glass ceiling that prevents them from becoming like CEOs and presidents and stuff like that? Does that sound, give me some nods or some shakes. Yeah? Okay, that sounds familiar. Okay, so this person, Karen Ashcraft, has this idea of a glass slipper, which is, you know, to be a computer scientist, or she also works with aviation pilots or like airplane pilots. I think the visual was important there for you to understand what I meant by an airplane. She talks about these stereotypes as creating this glass slipper. Do you remember in Cinderella how the ugly stepsisters are like trying to put their foot in? It does, yeah, and it just doesn't fit. Like there's nothing that the ugly stepsisters is going to be able to do that's going to be able to make that glass slipper fit. And for me, I find this glass slipper of what it means to be a computer scientist, it doesn't fit for me, you know? And maybe for a lot of people in this room, it doesn't fit. It's like really tiny. Like, who does it even fit? This idea that I would want to think about computer science every moment of my day. I love computer science. It's super fun. But like, hi, I'm also like a human, right? And I like good food and friends, etc. Okay, here's something that people said to me, which I think could be in your future if you go into computer science, is they say, Coleen, you won't like sitting in a basement coding until 3 in the morning. These things are true. Like, I'm not going to lie. I don't like to work alone, but turns out computer scientists work together. They work collaboratively all the time. I don't like basements. I'm not going to lie, sometimes there are basements. Like, were your computers in a basement? No? Nice, nice. Some of my college experience, some of my students' college experience is in a basement. I'm not going to lie about that. I basically never see 3 in the morning. Like, I'll wake up at 5 in the morning. Yeah, no problem. That's like the morning. But I never want to see 3 in the morning. But we have this glass slipper. Oh, this is true. This is as sad as I look in any photo that I have on the internet. This glass slipper, I think it doesn't make sense. Like, people seriously will tell me, like, Coleen, you can't be a computer scientist. You're not a night person. And I'm like, what absurdity to think that I couldn't be amazing at computer science because when it's dark out, I like to be sleeping. Like, and so I think it's really important that we as a society, when people say stuff like that we push back, be like, really? Really? Yeah, okay, so give me some nods or some shakes, like, oh, I could push back against that. People are going to say some nonsense, and I might be able to say, what makes you say that? Right? Like, I'll go to bed when I want. My students don't love it, because they know if they email me after 8:30 p.m., there's like no chance they'll get a response. I'm not saying everybody loves my sleep schedule, but it doesn't prevent me from being a computer scientist. And what I think about it is these people who were trying to give me this advice, they actually were showing me that they care. That was like them trying to be like, Coleen, you're not going to like this thing. So sometimes people are going to give you advice, trying to be in your best interest, but they just don't know that computer science doesn't have to involve working alone, sitting in a basement, or being awake at 3 in the morning. And I think people call this implicit bias, but I like to think about it as like this unconscious, unintentional bias. People don't know that they see me as an extroverted woman, and they think, she's really not fitting in that glass slipper. I should really steer her away. One, they don't know that I can smash that glass slipper, yeah? And they don't know enough about the field. And so we, as a community, need to push back. Okay, one piece of data, and then we'll go on to our third tip. This idea of the glass slipper and who it's going to fit shapes actually a lot of how people get treated, which is super broken. So there are these resume studies. Okay, so when you apply for a job, you submit a resume, yeah? And then people look at the resume and they're like, yes, no, da-da-da-da-da, yeah? Okay, so what they do is they're like, I have an idea. We'll take identical resumes and we'll just change the name at the top, yeah? Same exact resume, and then we'll see how many times they get called back. And if they get offered a job or get an estimate of how much this person would get paid, we'll look at that and compare. So here's an example where they put Janet and John. Who between Janet and John fits the glass slipper in computer science? John, right? And so they've done these studies in a bunch of different fields, and they show that John gets more calls back. Yeah? Okay. Why am I telling you this? This is just discouraging. Do you know what I mean? Like this, you're like, oh, people are terrible. These people aren't bad people. Do you know what I mean? Like, picture a chalkboard. Yeah? You probably pictured a specific thing, right? And probably many people had the same thing. And sometimes when I say picture a computer scientist, you might picture somebody and it might not be me. Yeah? Did anybody picture me? No? And so we're gonna, when people say picture A, or when you even just are thinking about hiring someone who's a computer scientist, you're gonna have this idea in your mind. But as humans, we need to push back against those stereotypes when we hear them. What makes you say that? And when we're evaluating people, we need to think about, whoa, am I comparing them to something that fits in this glass slipper? And I need to slow down so that I'm not using that unconscious bias, or that unintentional unconscious bias. Okay, my last advice. Okay, so we've show the breadth of computer science, because turns out it's got a bunch of stuff and stuff for everybody. We didn't have to turn it pink. The second one was pushing back against stereotypes. And this third one is about removing barriers. Okay. 12 students in this class, is that right? Do you know how many people don't have that opportunity? Here's your future. You go to college and you're like, oh, that thing I did at Caltech, that was pretty rad. Let me take a computer science class, yeah? And then you're sitting next to someone who's never programmed before, never seen computer science. And you're like, oh yeah, it was sort of no big deal. We just downloaded this data set and then extracted out the positions and the movement of asteroids and then plotted it. It didn't work. Do you know how scary you're gonna be? Right? Imagine yourself 8 weeks ago sitting next to you today. Okay, so here it's real that some people are going to have opportunities like you've had here at Caltech, and some people just are not. And it turns out that the fact that you got to do this opportunity, you're not the only people who might love doing computer science. They weren't we'll find the only 12 students in high school that want to do computer. No, everybody might love this. So it's important to think about splitting those intro courses in college based upon students' experience. And we're going to get to a concrete example of that at both UC Berkeley and Harvey Mudd in a second. But I want to take a step back to say this: remove barriers. We're going to come back to that. Okay, at Harvey Mudd, my little animation is broken. Some people, like you all, have some high school computer science experience, and so you'd come in and take this one, CS5 Black. And some people with no experience before, never seen it before, they'd take CS5 Gold, and then they go into our second semester course and our third semester course. And then people who have taken a ton of computer science and maybe have taken AP were like, oh, do you know what? Let's take 2 semesters all together, all in one semester, and then we'll hop you into here. I have 2 secrets about this. Okay, well, one concrete piece of advice. When you're applying to colleges and looking, okay, one, no matter if you want to do something sciencey or mathy, you're going to need to know some more computer science even than you know right now. So you're going to want to take some computer science classes. 2, try and find a school where the computer science classes that they offer are customized to people with your level of experience. Harvey Mudd has 3 options, so wherever you're at, you'll be chill. But not all schools are like that. Yeah? So you'll ask on the tour, be like, oh, how much previous experience is assumed? Yeah? Okay. 2 secrets. That's what I said. One is in these 2 classes, CS5 Gold and CS5 Black, those are Harvey Mudd school colors. Some students are like you and they already know some stuff, and other students don't know anything. And we want everyone to get to the same point, right? So when we have students like yourself, we just teach them other random stuff that's not going to help them in CS60 and CS70. Does that make sense? Right? Because then we take everybody, and then we're like, let's do CS60 together. And the stuff they learn is cool and like computer science-y, but it's just not going to help them in these next courses. Does that make sense? And so we have to take this thing, right? We look around and we're like, yo, this is not a level playing field. And so we've got to think about when we create our institutions like at Harvey Mudd, we got to be like, yo, it is not a level playing field. What are we going to do about that? In this CS42, okay, we talked about how some of y'all are going to be intimidating. Are you going to go to college and mean to be intimidating? No, don't do that, right? Don't go and mean to be intimidating. Most people aren't, but here's the thing, is you're going to be excited about it, and you're going to know stuff, and sometimes that can be intimidating. And so in this class, CS42, we teach them about that. We're like, yo, you know enough computer science that you can take 2 college computer science classes in a single semester. That's like a bunch of computer science. We think you're going to intimidate people, and we're going to coach you on how to not. Does that make sense? Right? We got not a level playing field, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to split those people up, and we're going to get them to the same point. And these folks, we're going to coach on understanding that their intention to not be intimidating is irrelevant. Their impact might be that they're intimidating and discouraging of other people in entering the field. Okay, I want to show the example of UC Berkeley does the same thing. So people either take AP Computer Science or they come in and take this class called CS10. Oh, I did grad school at Berkeley and undergrad at Berkeley. And so I got to teach this course, and I took that course and I designed this course. So it has like a special place in my heart. And this will feature heavily in our next stories. Okay. Do you know this slide was supposed to be just a little bit earlier? But let's read this, and this is our, Coleen told me on the college tours, I'm supposed to ask about the intro computer science course and whether or not you should have experience. And here's the thing, is some schools like super mess this up. I'll tell you afterwards if you want to ask which of those I know for sure are messing it up. But here, they say, you know, taking this course is like taking a foreign language class, but the majority of students are already native speakers. You'd think that'd help you, but teachers adjust to the native speakers. So people who are new to the idea get left behind the dust. My 12 students, you're the native speakers. And you need to make sure that actually wherever you go, those other students aren't left in the dust. Okay, so at Berkeley there was this thing, and we're going to jump back to this, like those bell curves, thinking about men and women for a second. At Berkeley there was this narrative where it was like, oh, it's super weird, like women and men do just as well in this class, CS61A, but in this 61B thing, like the women don't do as well as the men. Yeah, and you're like, what could it be, right? Something about being a woman, what could it possibly be? It doesn't make any sense, right? You look at this and you're like, well, there's got to be something going on, right? Do people know what programming language AP Computer Science A is taught in? Have people heard of Java? Yeah, Java is just another language that the computer knows, just like Python. So this one's taught in Java. CS61B is taught in Java. Yeah? CS3, which was at the time that I did this study, was taught in another language, which is called Scheme. And CS3 was taught in Scheme, and CS61A was taught in Scheme. Do you know that until this last year, not that many women take AP Computer Science? Did you know that? Yeah, the numbers are really bad. So if you look at, 56% of AP test takers are women, and this is from the year 2014, from the year that I did the study. And calculus, women are taking a bunch of the calculus tests, but only 19% of the AP Computer Science A. Yeah? Do you remember this one's in Java? So you're like, oh, I took AP. As a woman, I might be less likely to have taken AP. I didn't take AP in high school. But then those people who have taken AP, they saw Java here, and then they saw Java again here. Yeah? Do you think the next time you see Python, it'll be easier? Right? So when you control for previous Java experience, just like separate out the groups that do and don't have experience, men and women's grades are indistinguishable. Okay, so I'm like a little bit cheating because I'm merging in that like pushing back against stereotypes idea of being like, oh, if women are doing worse, why are women doing worse? We should dig a little deeper. And I'm mixing in the we need to think about the fact that it's not a level playing field and students are going to come in with different experience, and we need to design our institutions to handle that. Okay. My next piece gets to the theme of yet. So I mentioned that I had taught this course and taught this course, yeah? Okay, it is an undergrad. I went to Berkeley too. And I was not really confident in the whole computer science thing. I was like, oh, math and science for sure, but I don't know about computer science. So I my friend Irene talks me into taking CS61A. And it's like, okay. And then I'm like, oh, let me try and take this next one, CS61B, without her. One, not a great option. This one doesn't go well. Have you ever had some classes where you're like, I did not use effective learning strategies in there. This project is due tomorrow. I maybe should have started it before now. Yeah, have you had some of those experiences? So I'm in college. I'm in my second year. I take this course. 5 weeks in, I'm just on a really clear path to getting an F. Just the clear horizons. One, that's not a wonderful emotional experience. It's not an uncommon emotional experience, but it's not a wonderful one. So I drop the class, and then the classes at Berkeley are so big that my friend's English professor, when I was like, can I add this class a third of the way into the class? The professor thought I had been there the whole time. I didn't disabuse them of this idea, and so they signed my paperwork, and I got to join a class late. Okay, so you're like, oh, okay, Colleen, so you took this class, and then you failed it. Yeah, but my friend was persistent, and she was like, Colleen, we'll take it this semester. I promise it'll be way better. And we're sitting in the lab. You know how when you go on a computer, there's a little place to type in a username and a password? Yeah? Okay. So this one had a system, a type of computer I hadn't used before, Unix. And it had a place for me to type in my username, and I had been handed a piece of paper with my username. So I typed my username, and I hit enter, and then I started to type the password. You know how you expect the stars to show up? Yeah. No stars showed up. It's trying to be super, super secure, so people can't even see how many characters are in my password. But I'm sitting there in this class, and I'm like, Irene, I've like already broken the computer. Like we should definitely drop this class. Like it's not, I don't see the F on the horizon yet, but I feel like that's where we're headed. It wasn't great. Okay, she's persistent, wouldn't let me drop the class. So I take the first exam, and you're like, Colleen, you've already taken 5 weeks of this class. The first exam should be like a slam dunk. I get a 5 out of 25. That's not great. You know, sometimes you take a test and you're like, that test was totally unfair. No, this test seems fine. I just didn't know it yet. And that's where our word comes in, yet. So I probably knew at that point about 5 out of 25 of the computer science I was supposed to learn in that class, or up to that point, right? Did that mean I was never going to learn it? No, that's absurd. Did I mention that I've taught this class 3 times? You could be like, oh, Colleen, but just at Berkeley, they just let anybody teach classes, which is just a little bit true. But it wasn't that when I was teaching it, I didn't know it. I knew it. I just hadn't learned it yet, okay? And that's the key piece. And what was really nice is sometimes as a teacher, students don't do great on your exams, and then they come to your office and they're upset. And I can relate, right? Like, you've heard my story. I can relate. In all cases, I could be like, you didn't do as poorly as I did on the first exam, the second time I took it. Maybe someday you'll be teaching this class, right? So, yes. Sometimes in college, you're going to get low grades on things. Like probably getting a 40% on an exam, can you imagine? That's in your future. Isn't that weird? You're like, I'm not like a 40% kind of person. No, yeah, when you go to college, just everybody becomes 40% kind of people. And you just gotta like, one, you gotta have the support structures you need to roll with it, and then you gotta be like, oh, can I be a 50% kind of person? Like, let's see where we can go from this 40%, yeah? Give me some nods or shakes, students. Are you terrified? Not terrified. Yeah? Yeah. And the lesson here with this yet is it doesn't mean you're never going to know it, right? You might only know 40%, but that doesn't mean you'll never know it, right? It's just a yet. Okay, so this is a cool book that talks about that idea of like, oh, it turns out your mind is kind of like a muscle and it can grow and you can learn things. Like, do you know probably in the next year you're going to learn things? Just like I learned things that I didn't know when I took those tests. And so it talks about that. And this idea that like, oh, you need this geek gene is really problematic. Like if I thought I needed a geek gene to do computer science, like would I have kept going? No. Do I love computer science? And like, am I a computer scientist? Yeah, right? I didn't need some geek gene. I needed to push past and like actually learn it. Yeah? Okay. So this, have people heard of imposter syndrome? Yeah? Okay, well, it's this idea, and I have this. So like, do you know that sometimes I'm like, these people, they invited me to give this talk, but they don't know that I'm a fraud, right? Like, and then I come and then I tell them that I failed this class. Do you know what I mean? That I'm kind of a fraud. And I think I only know that little bit, and everybody else, they know all the things. Yeah? Turns out people don't know all the things. And hopefully you saw in these projects that it's really powerful to be able to work on interdisciplinary teams so that you know things that I don't know, and I know things that you don't know, and we can work together, and it's more awesome. Can you imagine that it's also like a little intimidating sometimes? Yeah? I don't know, so for me, this sort of like imposter syndrome, when I'm like sitting there being like, I hope no one finds out I'm a fraud, when I have that thought, this idea of an imposter syndrome is helpful to me. Yeah? Your mileage may vary. Okay, if you take one thing from this talk, I want it to be yet. Yeah? Okay? Yet? Yeah? And I want you to make sure that you take stickers and CS Teaching Tips flyers and CS Teaching Tips pens if you want one. Thank you very much.
Extremely inspiring. Thank you so much. And I think relevant not only for the humans in the audience, but also for the humans in the audience.
Yes, yeah, all the humans.
All the humans. Do we have a couple questions? And then I will go get our judges who will award Best Student Team, and then we'll go eat some food and celebrate. Yes?
You said that you failed the first course of that class, and then the second time around it was still equally as hard. How did you get better? Like, what were your studying strategies, or like, what did you do to like end up teaching the course later?
Yeah, I think it's like a little embarrassing because some of the strategies were like, oh, when I didn't know something or I was confused, I asked somebody about it. And I was like, oh, I don't understand this. And then they were like, oh, okay, cool. Do you know what I mean? Like, but give me some nods or some shakes. Like, you've sometimes found it scary to ask people for help, right? I think that's the thing in life that matters the most. So I wrote a grant application, right? So now as like a professor, I like write grants, and I'm like, please give me $500,000. Okay, so I had a friend read it, and she was like, Coleen, this is terrible. And I was like, oh, that's not good. But she was like, here's how you could make it better. And I was like, oh, I can do those things. And I had this realization recently where I was like, oh, maybe by myself, it could always be terrible. Because, as a human, I'm really good at asking for help. And so as long as I can get the help I need, I can be awesome. If I don't get the help I need, I'm like, will be maybe terrible. But that's fine. That doesn't mean that I am terrible. That means that I have this superpower of asking for help. You know? So, asking for help.
Asking for help. Other questions? You go.
If there's studies that say that one group does better, that say men are slightly better than women at whatever that subject was, are there studies that say the opposite since there was so little difference?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So thinking about like, okay, so we've got these two distributions, and we see really small differences between the means. Well, sometimes do we see differences between the means that go the other way? And so I can point you to a paper that does a good job of reviewing like hundreds of studies of gender differences by Stephen Ceci, C-E-C-I, I think 2003. And I'm sure in that set of hundreds of studies that I do not have encyclopedic knowledge of, I'm sure we see some flipping of them. But the big picture that psychologists think about is one dimension of someone's identity, right? Because we've got multiple dimensions of our identity. One dimension of someone's identity is probably going to be a pretty poor predictor of anything we might try to measure. Yeah? And so you see differences, like one of the ones that stands out to us visually is height, that you see differences between men and women's heights. Yeah? But that tends to be an outlier in terms of overall gender differences. Yeah? And mainly you see these these overlapping bell curves. But Stephen Ceci, and I can send you the paper.
Very good. I'll take our student up front. I think this is
our last question. And I'm going to be here. Okay, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talked a lot about trying to combat these differences that we have in gender in this field. I was wondering if you had ever faced any discrimination based on this before, and what you did to combat it when you were facing it yourself.
Yeah. So I think one thing is it's hard to know. A lot of this stuff is little. So remember, people literally said this to me. If I had a nickel for every time someone, when I was 18 to 22 and told them I was going to major in computer science, every time I told someone this, they would say this. And it wasn't until I was a senior in college where I was on a project with this really gregarious guy, Mark, and I was like, oh, but Mark, everybody always tries to tell you not to be a computer scientist because you're a people person. And he was like, no. And I was like, but every time. And he's like, no one has literally ever told me that I shouldn't study computer science. And so without having Mark's experience to help me understand the ways in which, oh, someone might have said this because I don't match the glass slipper, it's a little hard to put your hand on. Do you know what I mean? That and are these people bad people? No, right? They've got a mental image in their mind, and they applied that to me. But it can have really serious consequences. So when I went to declare my major, Irene, my best friend, had given me the pep talk like, Coleen, you should do it. Go in and tell them that you want to be a computer science major. I went in, and my academic advisor, who I have to file the paperwork, Eugenia, brings over another advisor to try and talk me out of studying computer science. Wow. Do you know what I mean? And so, but again, I think this is an expression of love. They're like, Coleen, my picture of what computer science is and my picture of who you are, they don't fit. But they just don't know what computer science is. And they've got this really narrow glass slipper that they're trying to force me into, and I don't fit. And so I think that there's a lot of sort of stories like that. And I think having that support group where when people would tell me, Coleen, you won't like computer science, and I'm like, but I do like computer science, having the people to kind of vent to, for me, was really helpful. And trying to do work to push back against those stereotypes was another piece of, for me, the dealing with that added burden. This is a burden, right? When people tell me, I tell them, oh, hey, I'm a computer scientist, and they act surprised, that doesn't feel good. Do you know what I mean? And so there's ups and downs. But I think by creating that support group and pushing and trying to fight stereotypes, I think it helps me. Maybe I was too long-winded.
We'll take one last question.
I promise I'll be so quick. Could you just ask a yes or no question? I'm kidding.
Unfortunately not. No, yeah, this was inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing. I had a question on two of the points you made, but it's one question. So you made the point about leveling the playing field,
yeah.
And you made a point about coaching students to not be intimidating to each other. And my question is, when you have a team of students working on a project together, it's a really great opportunity for the weaker students to learn a lot from the students with more experience. How do you manage that process and prevent it from turning into, the strongest student ends up doing all the coding and then everyone else is watching and they don't really learn as much? And also the opposite, where people kind of free ride off of someone else on their team. That's a really big problem, and I'm really curious of your strategies around that.
Yeah, great question. We have some strategies for managing that group work, nods or shakes. Have you been in groups that have been pretty dysfunctional? Where you did all the work, it happens a lot. And the thing that frustrates me, I worked as a software engineer, and it just doesn't happen in industry. Do you know what I mean? My coworkers and I, we all showed up, and then we did our thing, and if they were having trouble, I helped them, because we all have to get this thing done. And so a bunch of people have done work around how do you make the undergrad experience more like this industry experience where all of our goals were aligned. And so people do that through peer evaluation. One of the strategies I use in my classroom, this seems totally silly, is role plays. So here's the thing, is dysfunctional groups, there's not that many ways in which they're dysfunctional, right? I want to give each of those dysfunctional things a name, and then when my students are doing group work in class, say you're doing group work in class and some dysfunctional stuff is happening, I'm like, oh, remember how we talked about one person might be on their cell phone and not that engaged with the group? Maybe we got that going on here. So for me, it's about naming the behaviors that I do want to see and I don't want to see, and then having students do enough group work in class so I can intervene and know where they really might implode. Yeah, but we've got more tips and I'm happy to chat. Yeah, thank you.
These stickers
Yes.
for the more teaching tips. So I will set them on the reception. I'm going to go fetch the judges. So we're going to have another 2 or 3 minute break. And then, yes, we have a before the break.
I think oftentimes when you are organizing an event, oftentimes you are the one who thanks everyone, they contribute, but I think we need to thank Dr. Corbett too, because she organized everything. I've never seen anyone working as hard as she did. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to work in this project as a visiting researcher and learning scientist, and I want to thank her, and this is our card for her.
And that's a lie, because Ibuke is also an extremely hard worker and showed up every single day. And I couldn't have done it without you either, and I didn't even get you a card. I'm sorry. So let's give her a round of applause, too.